On today's show, we're back with part 2 with myself and Bryce Hendricks talking all things NBA draft with Atlanta Hawks. We'll get into all that right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1726 of Locked On Hawks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Tuesday into Wednesday here in late May. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app right now, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase with Gametime. Terms apply. Also, want to encourage you at the top of the podcast to make us your first listen each and every day. Check us out and subscribe to this podcast, Locked On Hawks, anywhere you find your podcasts. Spotify, Apple, YouTube, Overcast. We are all of those places and many more places. So I appreciate everybody listening to the show as always. This is part 2. So if you missed part 1 of this conversation, it is definitely better to start at the beginning with myself and Bryce Hendricks. That's episode 1725. It's part 1. It should be available in your same podcast feed listening to this podcast in, but this is part 2, just more on the NBA draft, all fun things, talking to Bryce about all kinds of NBA draft stuff. So top of the draft, his sleepers, etc. And we're going with more of that right now with part 2. I do want to get to Matias because he's the guy that you have high, who is generally seen as a top, 8 guy in the class for most people.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Who obviously I think could. I'm not saying he's going to play for the Hawks number 1, but he's at least conceivable. I think we could acknowledge the Hawks are not going to take Topic or Collier. They're not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
Matias, I haven't crossed Matias off my list. I don't think that I've heard the Hawks are in on him, but I wouldn't fall on the floor if they were like, we love him. So let's go to him now. You're obviously high on him if you have him in your top 4. So for people that didn't see the G League this year a lot, because I think that's probably most listeners to this, and most people in the world didn't watch a ton of the G League Ignite tape this year. I like him a lot too. But what is the same sort of thing? What is the elevator pitch on Matias and why he would be as high as he is for you?
I think it's probably very different than what a lot of people thought it would be coming into the year. Again, to be honest, I haven't really paid too much attention to like consensus or what a lot of people have been saying. But for me, it's
probably better that way. But you're probably better off. I kind of have to do that for other reasons, but I think it's sometimes better to just watch the tape and make your own decisions. So
yeah,
I'm jealous.
With Buzelis, I think he's a really good backside rim protector. I think that's something we've found is really valuable. It turns out he's not as long as I kind of thought he was. He only has a 6'10" wingspan, but he plays really long, really quick vertical. He can do just enough with the ball to not be. He can do just enough with the ball to not be like, a mess on that end. Like he can dribble more than someone like Risacher. I don't think he's like a. I swear he was comped to like Lamar Odom at some point. That's not who he is. But like
there were some wild ones, but especially coming in. I know you remember this, I'm sure, about like he was number 1 on some mainstream boards like last summer. Like actually, it was he and Holland were all up there a lot, the eventual teammates in the G League, and I saw some pretty aggressive comparisons. That if all you saw was that, and then you watched him play this year, you would be like, was that the same player that you were talking about a year ago? So I'm with you on that. You kind of need, if you have a comp in your head from 2023, I would probably throw it out.
Yeah, no, but to me, I guess elevator. You asked for elevator pitch, and I'm rambling.
That's fine.
For me, it's absolutely. I think he's a Swiss Army knife defensively, who's potentially a really good backside rim protector, which is to me maybe the most valuable type of 4-man defender you can have. I think there's a good chance he makes shots. But even if he doesn't, I think he's so athletic and versatilely athletic at the rim that it doesn't matter a ton. He can do some dunker spot stuff. I think he could probably even be just like a screen and roll guy. He could get up off 1 or 2 high points ball as well, and then he can just he can just operate and do more stuff than a lot of guys who I think have similar skill sets. I actually think, to me, Matias is a very similar sell to why I still believed in Jaden McDaniels when he, everyone kind of got out on him. Yeah. And they're like, oh, like, this was supposed to be like a big, he got the KD comps and everything. And that's not who he is. Like, Matias isn't Lamar Odom, but what he is a really versatile defensive player who, if you can just consistently get to make shots, is athletic enough to exist on the floor, even if he's not, an elite shooter. And To me, I just think that's a valuable archetype. It's the type of player who,
Definitely.
Again, is not a typical number one, but to me is a really typical lottery player. I consistently have guys like Matias, fairly high in the lottery. And I think we've seen it play out consistently that it's a valuable playoff player. Like the high end for Matias, as we were talking about comps, is someone like an Aaron Gordon. I think that's a really, really valuable NBA player. So
especially in the case of Gordon, who it took him to a second team who realized that he wasn't an on-ball guy.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's like, by the way, he's a top 50 player in the league, something like that, just doing what he does. So no, I've always liked Matias. I did this the last mock draft that I was participating in before the Hawks won the lottery. I got Matias at 10, and I was jubilant. I was like, that's the guy I would want in a dream world at 10, realistically. And then at number one, candidly, I wouldn't take him there. I think he's in my top 5, 6, 7 range, but I wouldn't take him number one. I do think, and look, this is not an area that I've explored a ton on the podcast, but there's a world still where the Hawks trade down. I think it's unlikely to happen, but it's possible in this draft. If they really think that there's not a huge gap, I think philosophically you can do that if you get enough of a reason to move down. And if they go, let's just say they go to 4 or something. Isn't that what the Spurs are 4? They go to 4, then Matias is firmly in play, in my opinion. At 1, I think it's probably not going to happen based on what I've heard. I say probably not definitely. Keep that in mind. I like he's my kind of guy, honestly. If you listen to the podcast, you probably expect that. The defense is particularly interesting. He seems to know how to play, which I like. And look, I would make the same case for Ron Holland in a different way, but it's so hard to remove these guys from that terrible, terrible situation they were in. And we've all said it. I think every podcast you're contractually obligated to mention how bad it was, but it really was so bad. It makes I don't know about you. It made it hard for me to evaluate them this year. It really did. Both
100%.
Tyler Smith too. I mean, it's the same thing. It's hard to evaluate anybody that was in that system. So no, I like Matias. He's not quite as, I think you touched on this, as dependent as Risacher is on the jumper. I do think that that's a swing skill for him offensively. If the shot is not average or better, he's going to have some trouble on offense. I feel like not unplayable, but not a guy he's going to be more of a you're okay, we kind of have to guard you guy, versus if he can shoot high 30s from 3, then you really have an intriguing kind of jack of all trades guy.
Yeah, I talked with some guys about the shot, and the tough thing is, I have a tough time determining if it's one issue that can be fixed or if it's 2 separate issues that will require the jumper to be rebuilt. He has this. He gets a ton of forearm pronation, so he holds the ball like this and then twists his arm out, and that pushes the ball towards the right. And then to compensate for that, he twists his hips, so it makes the window of what
it's
can be
it's like a double. It's in golf. It's like a double miss. You're you're going
Yeah. So, I don't know if that's what, can you just get him to move the ball straight up and then, his hips will stay more stagnant naturally, or is it something that's going to take more time? But, I think there's some okay touch there again, compared to someone like Holland, whose jumper touch I don't buy as much. I think Matias has some natural outside touch, and, and again, you said it best, but I also don't think he's reliant on the jumper to be an NBA player.
Agreed.
Versus some other guys, even Sarr in some ways, to be a really valuable NBA player, I think is kind of reliant on the jumper because I don't buy the pick and roll stuff as much. I think Matias would be a better true pick and roll 5 on both ends if we were just talking about filling that role. He's lower upside, and I'm with you where even though I have him in the same tier, I probably wouldn't take Matias over Sarr. It would have to be a really, really specific fit. If the Rockets ended up with the number 1 pick, I probably would have pushed for Matias over Sarr, but basically anyone else, Sarr is the better fit. But
I get it.
I do like Matias, and in this draft, if someone falls in love with Sarr and you're not in love with him like that, I would absolutely look to trade back and see if I could get him, because I think he's another guy who could make you a potentially really devastating defense playing next to Jalen Johnson if one or both of them could just make shots at a consistent enough level to, free the space for the other one.
Today's show is brought to you by the Gametime app. The Gametime is an authorized ticket marketplace of the NBA. It makes playoff tickets even faster and easier than it was before. That's the case for the NBA Finals, which are coming up really very soon. And I know I'd love to be there myself. I'm sure you would be as well. They have killer last-minute deals, all in prices, views from your seats, and the lowest possible price guarantee. And that all makes Gametime a fantastic option to make things easy for you in the ticketing marketplace. I've been a regular user of the Gametime app for quite some time now. It's come in handy for me a number of different times. That includes stuff like Braves games and Falcons games, concerts, theater tickets, etc. At Gametime, you save a ton of percentage off when you buy last-minute tickets for sports, comedy, concerts, theater, and much more. They have flash deals where you can save, and also save even more when you go to the actual app. Choose a section, and let Gametime choose the seats for you in that same section. They have an awesome feature as well. You can actually toggle to show the total up front with no surprise fees when you get to that checkout screen at the very end of the process. You can also get a panoramic view of your seats in the app before you buy them, and they're also getting the lowest possible price guarantee with the folks at Gametime. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with the folks at the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, redeem that promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off that first purchase. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. One more modest thing. I always hear the Denny Avdia account, and it's probably just because they're both white guys. But there's some similarities to how they play. And I always look at like Denny's first couple years, he wasn't shooting. Well, not even like making shots. He was making shots either, but he just wasn't shooting. And he wasn't being guarded. He was kind of being ignored. And then it's not a coincidence this year in his fourth season, he made this really notable jump on a bad team that nobody really watched, but he was really good this year. He shot it well and he shot it more. And it was like, I don't want to make that one-to-one, but it's kind of. And Denny, by the way, was a totally functional NBA player, and Matias, I think, has different skills and better skills in some areas than Denny did. Mm-hmm. But Denny was a guy who you could play. He was a rotation player, despite shooting I think it was 29% from three for 2 or 3 years. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly he became willing and able to shoot, and he was suddenly a starter and was good. So that's too simple, but I just don't want to foreclose on it. But man, you could say this for everybody. Steph Castle's the same way, Ron Holland's the same way, in different ways. But man, it's like, can you shoot or not? And I would just love to know the answer to all of these guys.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I think that's a great point. And we talk about the draft, and I get clowned all the time for past opinions. And the truth is, so much of it comes down to, did you guess right that this guy was going to make shots?
I mean, that's a lot of it. I mean, the Ron Holland thing. So I want to ask about Ron Holland while we're here. He might have the biggest split of anybody. Like people that I think are smart have Ron Holland number one. John Hollinger has Ron Holland number one on his board, and I get it. I understand why. But also, if he can't shoot, if he shoots the way he did this year, for instance, in the G League, if that's going to be his shooting long term, he would not be that high, obviously. So he's maybe the prototypical example in this class of someone who it's going to be really hard to figure it out, and you'll look stupid either way. But if we just kind of put that on the table as you can disagree with me if you want to in a second, put that aside almost. What about the rest of Ron Holland? Do you like Ron Holland as a prospect beyond that? Because I think we all kind of build the shooting questions in. What else?
Man, I really wanted to love Ron Holland. I came into this year this is the guy I'm probably going to have number one. Played at Duncanville. For whatever reason, I enjoy watching Duncanville, and I was really high on him there. There's obviously some stuff, right? The motor is great. It's rare that you see a guy as highly touted as him that plays that hard. I think that's something that him and Risacher have in common, where it's man, when was the last time you saw a guy who was, really this well renowned, who also plays with this type of intensity? Yep. That's great. I think the left foot burst and athleticism is great. I think my biggest issue is that I just don't actually think he's that good at defense. I really think he's sold so often as this, high level defender if he shoots guy. And I actually think he's much closer to he creates really easy advantages going towards his right hand off his left leg. He has really bad imbalance in his legs. I don't want to get too deep into it, but he has no juice off his right leg and a ton of juice off his left leg. It's pretty, it's pretty stark. If you slow down and you watch when he hits crossovers, you'll see that every single time he has to reset his feet so that he can explode off his left leg. He is never hitting a move and exploding off that right leg. It allows NBA defenders are going to have a much easier time guarding that, especially if he's not making shots. But I digress. Again, that's too much. But I think on the ball defensively, he's just really bad. Like some of it's the size, the skinniness that he can get pushed through. But I just think he stands upright too much. He's so focused on either he's trying to give a gap too much and his footwork is really bad and he's always drop stepping and defenders are getting hips really easily, or he presses up too much and then he stands too upright and he just gives up his hips too easily. He gets blown by quite a bit. He does a lot of hopping and I'm not sure it's all just like, footwork stuff that'll get cleaned up in the NBA. I think there's, again, partially because of the athleticism and balance, partially because he wants to contest from behind every time. He's one of those guys where it's like, I want chase down blocks. Mm-hmm. That type of defense just doesn't work in the NBA. That's why I'm much more comfortable projecting Risacher as an on-ball defender because he's not like that. He is trying to flatten guys out and make their drives harder in a way that Holland just isn't. I do think Holland is a really good like nail kind of steals defender guy, but that's just a less valuable type of defense than what Matias brings. Or even what maybe Risacher brings if Risacher is truly like a lockdown guy. Like when I think of the most valuable types of defense, I think, okay, are you big enough, strong enough to guard the Kevin Durant's, the LeBron James, those types of players of the world? Or are you a good enough rim protector that you can teams need to find a way to keep you in the paint? Especially like we've seen how teams, their go-to way of guarding like Embiid and Jokic now is to put someone else on Embiid and Jokic and then keep another guy at the rim. Can you be that guy they keep at the rim? Holland isn't either of those. Because again, he can't really get up off 2 feet. Holland is a pretty bad like low man guy. I think he has to really sprint in to help on those blocks. He can't get vertical the way Matias can. He's an energy guy. He'll probably find a spot in the league just because he's so athletic and there is some star equity there. Like it's easy to see that first step and how easily he creates advantages and how good he's a really good finisher too. And he's a devastating transition player. Okay. Like there's potential for him to be like a 20, plus point per game scorer. But I also just think with him, there's a lot of stuff that really worries me and I'd still draft him in the first round, but I think it would be pretty ill-advised to take him here at 1, especially considering, again, the Jalen Johnson thing. I think he's super redundant with Johnson. And it's it would be probably a mistake in my opinion. But there's stuff there. I don't want to seem like I hate him. I want him to succeed, but
there's a reason I team up that way. Like the range is so big because I think you just said all of it. Like, and you came around to it at the end. Like there is a pathway for him to be the 6'7", 23-point a game, hyper athletic wing that every team in the league wants. I mean, there's a comparison out there that I've seen that's not insane to the Jaylen Brown path. Like Jaylen Brown had a really rough year at Cal. He was not efficient. He wasn't a shooter then. He was not a proven shooter by any means. And look, he's made huge strides. His shooting's come so far. He still can't do certain things like dribble his left hand, all these kind of things. But Jaylen Brown became a star. And granted, he went number 3 in the class. That was divisive when it happened. I mean, it was a long time ago now, but that was divisive when it happened. And because it was like you kind of had to watch him in high school to take him there versus the way what he put on film at Cal. And you could certainly make the argument for Ron Holland. Like he had this rough year in the G League, but it was a weird context and all that stuff. So I'm not saying he's going to become Jaylen Brown. Don't get me wrong. But that's an outcome that I can see happening. I could see him becoming a top 25 player in the league if it works. So if you're a ceiling drafter, like philosophically, if your whole thing is I want to take the guy with the highest ceiling and you think that's Ron Holland, I don't think you're crazy. I really don't. Mm-hmm. It's just that for me, I'm a little bit more median, a little bit more, not necessarily floor, but and I definitely like him more than you do based on what this conversation we just had. I like him more than you do, but I wouldn't take him 1. I think that I would have him on my board if you traded down, similarly to what we talked about before. But he's fascinating to me, and he has been this whole time. Like, if the Hawks had gotten him that had been 4th on the board instead of 1st, there was that minute where there could have been 1, 2, 3, or 4. If they had been 4, I would have done a lot of Ron Holland talk for a month. Right now, it's not. He's kind of pushed to the side because I think he's not realistic. He's not going to go number 1, I don't think. But I just find him really interesting because of all what you just said. The split there is just it's wide for everybody. Man, his outcomes have a huge.
Yeah. you know what's funny is you're definitely higher on him than me, it sounds like, but also I completely agree that there's a world he can be like a Jaylen Brown caliber player.
Yeah.
Now that's undeniably outlier development on Brown's part, but
of course, yes.
It's also like a path you can outlight. Like,
well, Jimmy Butler's another one that I've heard for Ron Holland. Like, and Jimmy, speaking of outlier growth, Jimmy went from the 30th pick in the draft out of Marquette, who was a defense only guy, and became an offensive star. Like, that's not you can't project that path. It's just that it's one of those things where you're trying to find, again, I just named a pair of 6'7" physically gifted wings who developed their offensive game. And it's not, you can't, again, it doesn't mean you can bank on that. It's just that if you're optimistic about the tools, you see the 6'7", super athletic, physical, play super hard, like you said, guy. And then if you get the outlier development of one of those guys, or, the one I've always heard is, Kawhi's development offensively was not something you could have projected, and it happened. So, but those are 3 examples out of how many examples? You know what I mean?
Yeah. But, and something I'll say, in your favor is that I'm not here. I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I'm the most connected guy in the world. But, I talk to people. I know a few scouts and stuff, and all I've heard is that, he's a hard worker. He's
great intel
about the right things. And even some more, towards like he's even like on like the Zach LaVine, Colin Sexton, like basketball psycho, as some like to refer to it. And I do struggle to bet against those guys, especially if they're 6'7" and as athletic as Holland, right? Like, I think there's a spot in the league for him. I just worry, like a lot of those guys you mentioned, I think we're much better defenders than Holland. Like, I think maybe my biggest disconnect is I don't buy the defense.
Well, that's why, and honestly, that makes sense. Like, everything you said about that, if you don't think the defense is as good as some people do, then you couldn't possibly be that high on them. That's a divide that makes total sense. I'm not saying you're right or wrong. I just, if that's your evaluation, you can't have him as a top 5 prospect in this class. I don't think, based on everything else that he has, all the questions about his offense. If you don't buy the defense, like, all right, what are we doing here? Then it becomes more of a like bet on the tools and upside bet. But those guys come into play later in the draft, not necessarily that high in the draft. So anyway,
100%.
I won't make you keep doing that. The rest of the show, I want to get to guys that you like. So we've done the high and low on guys, but I'm trying to get people on that I can give them rope to talk about guys that they like, so we can talk positively about some prospects, even if they're not Hawks guys. For instance, you mentioned having Isaiah Collier in your top 4. That is not an outlier opinion, but it's not a consensus opinion. For instance, I feel like the internet's higher on Collier than the league is right now. Does that seem like it's fair? So that's one. But I'm not telling you who to talk about. But I did warn you about this. Who are some guys that you like in this class, maybe more than everybody else does? And if there's a chance for me to bring it back to the Hawks, I will. But it's not a requirement.
Yeah. So I think Collier is a great place to start, because I think for me that's one of those where you talk about ceiling drafting, and I think Collier's just a really high ceiling player. Yeah. He was in a pretty bad context at USC. He was hurt for a lot of the year. I think he's the best advantage creator in this class. I don't think there's anyone who with or without screens creates advantages better than him. I think he's fairly smart. I think he's a good passer. I think he projects to me as a pretty good defender. He is falling victim to the I haven't come up with a great name for it, but whenever there's these highly ranked RSCI guards, they're expected to be perfect in their freshman year. And if they're not perfect, it feels like they're almost completely dismissed sometimes. We've seen that. I mean, Kentucky guards are the most famous, and that's why we have the Kentucky guard syndrome. But I think it's even more so than that. It's guards in general who, for whatever reason, underperform their RSCI rankings, but, continue to develop and make a name for themselves in the league. And I think Collier is he's someone who he's strong. I think strength is a real separator for guards. I think he's probably I didn't see the combine measurement, but he's probably a real 6'2", 6'3", like real point guard size. And he just gets hit super easy as a driver, and he makes good decisions when he gets into the lane. Like, he's a good finisher. I think he has good touch. He's one where I think a lot of people freak out about the jump shot. I understand that. I think I buy it to be good enough. But I've been burned by betting on guards like this before. I had, I think I had Sharif Cooper probably like 17 or something, and that was lower than some people, right? But
Hawks fans, there you go.
But I really like Collier, and I think he gets underrated just because he's a guard who played on a team that wasn't very good. And sometimes that's all it takes is he played on a team that wasn't very good. But, I've been watching him now for like 3 years, and every time I've seen him, my takeaway has been, this is the best guard in this class pretty comfortably. There were always questions, is it him or DJ Wagner? I was like, it's Collier. Collier's a better player. And obviously Wagner was not good this year and is not even in the draft at all. But, I think Collier, if you want a ceiling, it's something similar to like a Tyrese Maxey, but probably less of a shooter, more of a passer type. But he's going to get talked about, because I'll bet you he'll fall out of the lottery. And,
it'll be the Maxey panel over again.
Yep. And people are going to say, oh, maybe he could be Tyrese Maxey. And while he's not that as a player, I think he could potentially reach that caliber. There's even a ceiling where it's. He is the type of guy who could just drive efficient offense for a really good defensive team. Like that's what I see for him is, hey, surround him with really good defensive talent and say, hey, we're going to give you a ton of usage and just, play with that. I think there's the NBA has come back to positionality again. We went away from it a little bit and it was like, oh man, we just want wings. We wanted everyone to be 6'4" to 6'8" and to be able to switch and do all that. And I love that version of basketball too. But we've seen this strong return of the guard and the big as potential build around pieces. And I think more than anyone in this class, if you were going to tell me, hey, someone in this class is going to break out and be the best player on a team that makes the finals or something, my money would be on Collier for that.
No, I can totally see it. And when I was doing more mock stuff a few months ago, I was consistently higher on him than the sort of intel boards were, because I think the league, and every once in a while this happened to Maxey. It's the most recent example, but there's like every once in a while there's a guy on the internet's like, why is this guy falling so far? And it doesn't mean it always works, but he did get punished for USC a little bit too much. It wasn't his fault, I don't think. The jump shot's a question. It didn't really go in that well this year, but he was a good 2-point finisher. He's really strong. You mentioned the height. He measured at 6'2.5" without shoes. So that's 6'3.5", 6'4". Good size for a point guard. He's physically gifted. No, I see it. I definitely think he has a path to be at least a starting point guard. And that's, if you get a starting point guard at the end of the lottery or, God forbid, beyond the lottery, like that's a really good outcome. Even if he's not going to hit the ceiling that you lay out, like, that's a strong outcome if you become a starter. So, no, I like him too. I think less than you do, but that's okay. I like him more than I'm between the consensus and you on as a color somewhere. So that's
fair.
Who else do we? You know what? Who's your next guy? I'm not even gonna tee you up. Who else on Bryce's guys list that you love?
The other guy, and I feel like I have a lot less to say here than I could, but the other guy who was just in my top 4 was Reed Sheppard.
Oh yeah.
I just think I think he's somehow under-discussed as like one of the best shooting prospects ever. Like he's a very good shooter. 50% from 3 this year. Like I think I was going through his synergy clips today. Actually, I think like 97 of them were pull-ups, and he was in the 99th percentile of pull-up scoring. Like, that's sometimes if a guy just has a special skill, I don't really care about it. Ton of the other stuff sometimes. Like I think he's a sound defender, not great. He's best off the ball. He's not Derek White, but like he can do some good nail. So he kind of reminds me of like a little bit of like he's not as stout, but a little bit of like Andrew Nembhard defensively. Just in that like he does a lot of good stuff at the nail. He's obviously really smart.
Hopefully he'd be better on Jalen Brunson than Reed.
Yeah. Well, see, and that's who he's probably going to struggle on the Brunsons. But
no, I'm kidding, but I agree with you. I do like. Yeah. I think people are going to, especially people that didn't watch college, are going to see Reed Sheppard and they're going to see short white guy and be like, he can't play defense. And I don't think he's great defensively. I think the steal rate in particular, and the block rate over-index what he actually is going to be defensively. Because if you just look like, I think it was, I can't remember which stat model, but it was like one of the stat models is it's off the charts for Reed Sheppard.
Yeah.
And part of that's the shooting too, but part of it's the steal and block rates, because those are usually really good indicators. And he's really got them. But I think that he kind of, how would I say this? Not that he was forced to, but I think he kind of knows what he can't do. And he's got great hands, and he lets those hands make up for some of what he can't do. Does that make sense?
100%. I think he's going to be probably pretty bad on the ball early in his career. I think he can develop into it okay. But, you bring up Brunson. Something else I think he has similarly is that I don't know that he's someone who can be guarded by smaller guys like at his higher end outcomes because he rises up so high and so quickly. That's like the reason Nembhard couldn't guard Brunson is because even though they're like, Nembhard is like 2 inches taller than Brunson just rose over him every time, and like the contestant didn't bother him at all. I think Sheppard has some of that. His biggest issue as a player is that he comes too wide off of screens and pick and roll. I think that's something that's fairly teachable. I don't really see like superstar with Sheppard unless the shooting is just like to that level. But
you have to be ridiculous, which is it's not insane. Like,
I
won't use the step comp. Don't know what you use the step comp. No one ever. No. But like that's the only way. The way that I've heard people try to say here's how he gets a star is something like that. And I'm not. Yeah. I would just never think that's possible again. I'm sure someone maybe do it, and then in my lifetime, someone will shoot like Steph, and it will happen. I don't know if it's going to be Sheppard, but even then, I think Steph's on-ball game was better than people remember it being, even when he was younger. Anyway, so I'm with you, and also I think people know this. The reason I've done less read on this podcast is because like I don't think the Hawks can take Reed Sheppard. I just don't.
Yeah, 100%.
Based on none of what I mean, I wouldn't have him and played number 1 overall anyway. But for any team, but the Hawks make it even more. More of a cross off for me, especially because I'm in the camp of that the Hawks should keep Trae Young, and Trae Young and Reed Sheppard they just don't work.
See, so, I'd actually maybe push back. Like I think there's a world where in the regular season you can get away with it.
Oh no, I agree with you on that. I just think that, and look, this is the end of our podcast. It's fine. Trae's defense is not as bad as people think that it is anymore. But I still think if you're using a top, not even number 1 pick, a top 5 pick, let's just say in this scenario, you would want to draft a guy in theory that doesn't have to not be on the court with your best player in a playoff game. And I think that they would have some trouble. Even with DeJounte, I mean, okay, let's just use DeJounte. Like DeJounte has better physical gifts defensively than Reed Sheppard. He's taller, he's longer, etc. His rep defensively is above where it actually is. And they haven't been able to play with those two guys together on defense. And I think Reed is even small. In fact, I know he's smaller. So all those things, I actually on offense, it might work pretty well. In fact.
Yeah.
But I can't see it. But hey, it doesn't mean he's a bad player.
It'd be like having like another Kevin Huerter-esque player next to him, and we've seen how that works, right?
Well, it worked. It worked enough to go to the conference finals. But no, honestly, this is not a Pistons spot. I really want to see. I don't think it's going to happen. I would like to see Reed Sheppard in Detroit.
See, and I think we're like I think Detroit would be great. I'd kill to see him in Orlando. Like I'm with you.
Somewhere he could play next to someone who's a big guard next to him. Orlando doesn't even have Orlando has it's more like Paolo and Franz versus guards, and Detroit would be Cade, of course. Like someone who could play next where Reed's the smallest guy on the court, but isn't playing only point guard. You know what I mean? That's kind of the theory of why I mentioned Detroit because they're picking what are they? Are they their 5th? That would be the highest spot where I would be like, all right, I totally get it there. Houston in a different world where they didn't have Van Vliet would be interesting. I don't know. I like Reed Sheppard. But again, probably less than you do, but I like him. I like him quite a bit. He's in my top 10 firmly, so I'm a fan.
For me, I with a lot of teams, not with the Hawks probably, but I would consider him at 1 just because I do think he has the best skill in the draft, and I also think there's something there with just his potential to play on and off the ball that I think is worthwhile. But I'm with you where it's tough and part of what led me to putting Reed at 1 or 2 wherever I'm going to end up with him is I was thinking about this draft and I'm like I had Cason Wallace at 4 last year and I was like would I draft Cason Wallace first overall in this draft this year? And I think I probably would have. And
which is
I'm not sure Reed is that much of a worse product. I think I preferred Cason a little bit to Reed Sheppard, but I think it's somewhere in the range. And I was higher on Cason than most, I think, but something like that. Quickly, one other guy. I know we're going long, but
no, it's fine. I'll keep going.
Someone who I think is potentially really worthwhile. I haven't paid too much attention to consensus, but I've seen him as low as like the 50s. If the Hawks could find a way to get DaRon Holmes, they should.
I'm a fan also of him, and it does seem. I know you're not paying attention to consensus stuff. It seems like he's been rising.
Okay.
In the more national, the ESPNs, I think Sam at the Athletic actually had him pretty high the whole time, but I think he's come up in the ESPN. I don't know about Bleacher Report. I think he went pretty low. He's pretty low there. But anyway, I'm 100% with you. I've had him as first round pick all year long. I like DaRon Holmes.
Yeah, no, I just think there's a lot there. The biggest issue was he's a great passer who played in an offense that didn't utilize his passing at all.
That's correct.
So I don't really know, like that really hurt him. I think he can shoot. Like, I'm pretty confident projecting him as someone who can make shots. Like, he doesn't have a huge track record of it, but I think it looks good. And the improvements he's made year over year on it are really good. The only issue is that when he gets tired, he'll lean his shoulders forward or back, and that tends to throw off. Like you can always tell if it's going to miss short, it's because he threw his shoulders back. If he's going to miss long, it's because he threw his shoulders forward. But I think that's a fairly simple fix. I think he's gotten better every year. I just think he's a great passer. I think he's a versatile defender. I think he can legitimately switch. I don't know if he'd be a great switch big, but like he can do it sometimes. He can operate your DHO stuff. I think he's a really good post scorer. I would consider him like top 20 easily. And like I've seen him, like I said, super low. I hope he continues to rise. I don't know exactly where he's going to go, but to me, he's one of the guys in this class who I'm most confident saying, yeah, that's a player who, even at lower level outcomes can contribute to a playoff rotation. There's only so many guys that I'm confident saying that with. And I think Holmes is one of them. He's just the type of big who matters the most in the playoffs. And I don't see that changing anytime soon.
I'm definitely on your side. I just looked while you were talking. Vicini's got him 26th, which is kind of where I am, probably in the 20, somewhere in the 20, but a first round pick for me. Whereas I believe ESPN is like you said, like around 50, that's too low. It's just too low for me. And he's not even old. Like I know it feels like he was at Dayton forever, but he's not old. I think he's still 21. He's still 21. Like he's not. Yeah. That's not super old. Yeah. So no, I'm in on him as well. And at some point, this is a tease. I'm planning to do a show that's like exclusively second round focused, even though the Hawks don't have a second round pick, because it's pretty easy to get one. If like last year, for instance, they got to get your guy Mo Gay, to bring it full circle, to get your guy Mo Gay, they traded to get that pick. They went proactively, got that pick in the moment to make sure they got Mo Gay, and it's doable. Basically any team short of like having maybe Phoenix does not have any scratch to get anybody anymore. They have no picks to offer, but the Hawks can get back in if they want to. So if there's somebody in the top 4 that falls too far, like a DaRon Holmes, we'll see. In fact, I'll be kind of surprised if the Hawks make one pick on draft night. Just kind of not shocked, but like a little bit surprised.
I feel like they're a team with a track. Even like when they got Skylar Mays, they moved back to the draft.
They often move, and look, they've also had very little success in the second round. It's a pet peeve of mine. They haven't really hit on a second round pick in like a decade. Like Mike Muscala was the last one they hit on, and that was he's still in the league, but that's been 10, 11 years now. Maybe Mo Gay will change that. Maybe Steph Lundy will change that. Those guys were drafted last year. Before that, you could argue Skylar Mays might have been their best pick for a while, and he didn't go to like 15. He's still in the league too a few years later. But anyway, we will see.
Yeah.
Bryce, thank you for the time. We've gone long. That's my fault and not yours. Hopefully I didn't derail your evening. Where can folks find all of your work? I will do my best to plug it before I bring you into at the top of this podcast as well. But where can folks be finding all of your draft stuff? Because it's great. And by the way, you guys don't care about time at all on your podcast. You guys don't forever.
No. We go like, if anything, my fiance will be happy that she'll be like, "Oh, you were only recording.
You're done." Oh, yeah.
No, you could. Really, the only thing publicly I do anymore is the Upside Swings to be a Draft podcast, which is everywhere you can find podcasts at Bryce Hendricks 14 on Twitter. But for the most part, I've stopped writing. Most of the basketball work I do now is behind the scenes, I guess you could say. But
you're coaching. You're a basketball coach.
Yeah, I coach at a JUCO in Washington State. So staying close to home and continuing to work and grow and just happy that I still get to do some of this stuff sometimes, because I know I told this story last time and we're later into it, but like for whatever reason, one day randomly I started listening to your pod, like to Locked On Hawks. Like I'm not a Hawks fan. I care very little for anything Atlanta. I've actually never been to the state of Georgia in my life, but I started listening to Locked On Hawks, and you were the first guy to convince me that Matt Mitchell was a really good basketball player, and that
I like Matt Mitchell still. I still believe in Matt Mitchell all these years later.
Someday.
No, I appreciate that. And yeah, I mean, there's especially when the Hawks are rebuilding, I think I did more draft content than most shows would have done. But it was just, I like the draft. And even now, like this was a little bit easier and also harder, as you and I were talking about before we started recording. It's like it's almost better for me that there isn't a number one pick that's consensus. Last year would have been like I talked to Matt Tynan, who covers the Spurs, and I was like, "What did you do between the lottery and the draft last year? Like we all knew what was going to happen." He was like, "We just started doing Wemby talk already." I'm like, "Aren't you going to wear yourself out?" But I guess not. But anyway, there's more options for the Hawks, and we got into some of those on this podcast, and I appreciate it. So thanks again, Bryce. I do appreciate it. I will try to find a third Bryce for the next show. We're 2 in a row here. I'm not sure if I know another Bryce, so maybe not. But thank you for being here, my friend.
Absolutely, thank you so much.
As for everybody else, please subscribe to the podcast. Check out Upside Swings. I recommend it at the highest level, and we'll see you guys next time.